And when you have a state that's the poorest state in the nation, and then you go to the Delta, which is the poorest part of the poorest state,
right?
It was really something, right? So
I'm gonna ask you a question in between that, because you're hired as the CEO, because this is about leadership, this is about confidence. Coming into that situation, how do you then understand what your role is, be confident in what you're doing, and lead people that are depressed? And I don't mean like mentally, I mean they're in a very low economic state, to encourage them. Where do you find that, and how do you go about leading them?
Well, that's a super question, because that was probably, if not the most important issue, at least the second most important issue.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Leading with Audacious Confidence. I'm Alicia Couri, your host, and today with me, I have Ed Johnson, and I'm so thrilled that he took the time today to join us, because it's a holiday weekend. I know you're listening to this, it's not a holiday weekend, but it is a holiday weekend, and we're taking the time to share this with you, because this is really good stuff. So get ready. So Ed Johnson is the CEO and founder of Johnson Global Ventures, real estate, sustainable materials, healthcare ventures, and global economics. So that is like a mouthful, because I can't even I do a lot of things, but I can't wrap my brain around those. That's like big things that you're doing. So tell us a little bit more, Ed.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, Alicia. It's wonderful. So I would say that everything that I'm involved in probably was an evolution. I didn't seek out to say, I'm going to be involved in sustainability. I'm going to be involved in real estate. I'll be involved in all these things. I mean, some of those things were intentional, but I think that I would say the foundation for which my life has been built on a professional basis has been 2 or 3 pillars. And one of those pillars is communications. It took me many years, maybe until I was in my 40s, that I realized that one of the gifts that I had was communications. I think other people realized that before I did. And so
listen,
the ability,
the 40s and 50s are great.
Yes,
so many wonderful things about yourself that you were too afraid to acknowledge when you were younger.
No doubt, right? We really get to know ourselves at that point, which is really interesting. But, when I look back at my life, I realized that from high school into college that I had the gift to write and the gift to speak. And people did want me. I did eventually host 2 radio programs on business and leadership, things like that, which your gifts seem to follow you in life. Or I guess I followed my gifts, which I discovered later on. So how did I get involved? I mean, Johnson Global Ventures, I would say that in college, I'll never forget, I was a senior in college at Florida State. And I remember a friend of mine, I was getting my first business degree, and a friend of mine was getting her master's in accounting. And she looked at me and I looked at her, and we said, well, what are you going to do when you graduate? I said, what are you going to do when you graduate? And she said she wanted to be a CPA in a small firm. She's done that now for a couple of decades. She said, what do you want to do? I said, you know what? I really have the bug to do international business. Well, when you're 22 years old, you have no idea what's ahead of you in life. You think you know, but you don't know.
Right.
So for me, and I would say to everyone out there, success in life and leadership sometimes is an evolution of growth in who you are as a person, the things that you go through, the people that you learn from. I'm very grateful to God and my parents for having people, from my parents initially, and also having people in my life, not from teachers to bosses and mentors, friends that weren't even bosses, that actually took me under their wings in the business world and taught me about business. You know, it's the stuff you don't learn in the textbooks, right?
Right.
It boils down to how to treat people. It boils down to how to anticipate, how to project, to understand the metrics of business as well as the metrics of people, right?
Right.
And that balance is always so important. And I think the best leaders, regardless of if it's, you know, we think of leadership, we think of leaders, we think of politics, or we think of maybe
Right.
business, you know, we think of the richest people in the world. We don't always think of, you know, the person leading a Girl Scout troop. We don't think of the person, you know, that's, you know, leading even an HOA. No, HOAs don't always get
The best rap.
reputations, but we don't look at the person that basically has given up their time to make things better.
Right.
So for me, you know, I feel grateful that I've had some really good teachers to sort of model the way for me.
Yeah, mentorship is huge. Teachers and mentors.
Right. So for me, I would say that I'll get into the businesses a little bit later, but I found that who I am and what I mentioned communications, but there are some leadership philosophies that I've learned along the way. I've taught
Wait, I haven't even asked you the question yet. I have to ask you the question.
I'll hold it. I'll let you ask the question.
Hold it.
I'll hold that. I'll talk about the businesses then, if that's okay. All right. So the reason I brought up the whole thing about international is that I really just coined Johnson Global Ventures within the last couple of years because at the advice of a few of my friends and my CPA and things like that, because I was doing a lot of international travel. A lot of my work back then and today, almost 7 days a week, I'm on WeChat, I'm on WhatsApp with people around the world doing business. And so it's just who I am. It's just what I do. And I would say that how does you know, sustainability fit in? Well, I would say at least 20 years ago when I lived in Chicago, I was introduced to renewable energy. Technology has always fascinated me.
Yeah.
And I started learning about solar and wind technologies back in the early days before we even had the term sustainability.
Right.
You know, it was, I think, you know, we're just talking about renewable energy, things like that. But I don't think we really had a term that we coined sustainability when it came down to renewable materials or energy, things like that. So I learned as much as I could from people that knew more than I did about solar energy and wind. I had a friend that was a mentor for me that was an executive with Florida Power and Light. And he and I talked a lot about energy, and they weren't quite ready to bring in solar energy because there were a lot of question marks. And so from there, I learned a lot about wind energy, started doing some consulting with a company out of California that was manufacturing vertical wind turbines, which I thought was fascinating versus the blades. The big bladed wind turbines were the first that we see on commercials, you know, and those blades are huge, by the way.
Yeah.
If you ever seen one up front in person. But unfortunately they're noisy and they kill birds. So there was a designer that came up with a vertical wind turbine that twirls upward vertically, and it's quiet, doesn't kill the birds, and there's some advantages to that. And so I got fascinated by that. And then I got the bug for, well, what else could we do that's renewable? What else could we do that's sustainable, that really works? From can we have a biodegradable bottle? Plates, you know, all these different things. And so I was totally fascinated with this, and basically started learning from other people, doing research online, calling people, getting them to teach me things about sustainable technologies. And I got headhunted to be the CEO of an operation in the Mississippi Delta during 2008, 2009.
Right.
And it was
during
the economy. Yeah. Remember the crash, right?
Yeah, that's during the crash.
Yeah, it was really, really rough. And so the job was running economic development in the Mississippi Delta, which was the poorest part of the poorest state in the nation.
Was that when there was the oil leak too?
Yeah, it was right. It was right. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it was right. You don't look old enough to remember that. So yeah, yeah. So you're correct because one of my one of the companies that was in the Delta at the time created a sustainable product that would eat up the oil spills. Okay,
Right.
so yeah, so I was at that time I was headhunted to run that operation. And when you have a state that's the poorest state in the nation, and then you go to the Delta, which is the poorest part of the poorest state,
right?
It was really something, right? So
I'm gonna ask you a question in between that, because you're hired as the CEO, because this is about leadership, this is about confidence. Coming into that situation, how do you then understand what your role is, be confident in what you're doing, and lead people that are depressed, like, and I don't mean like mentally, I mean, they're in a very low economic state, to encourage them? Where do you find that, and how do you go about leading them?
Well, that's a super question, because that was probably, if not the most important issue, at least the second most important issue before I got there, during the time I got there, and still today. Because when you go to an area like that, and I tell you this is really interesting. I remember the interview that I had with the executive board. And in the interview was the mayor of the major city. I had 5 mayors on my board, and this lady was a lawyer. She was the mayor of the town. Her father was a lawyer. He was in the room along with all the power brokers in the area. And so I looked at her, and I could tell. I said, I said, the people need hope, don't they? And she said, that's exactly what we need. They need hope. And so, my challenge was, okay, I knew that we could get there. Okay. Right. But, the issue was, when you're in that state, you can't see yourself out of that situation. And you do need a change agent to come in. And so I would just say this, the newspaper, they did a bunch of articles. I was on TV a lot before I had my radio programs. And they were, just say this, they were calling me the Black Moses. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing this. They said, oh, here's this guy coming down from Chicago to lead the people. And I'm like, oh my God, are you serious? And that was the last thing, but we laugh about it. But what's really interesting is that it's like we talk about, in America, there's some people that I did work with, I would call them friends. They wrote a book on leadership. And one of the things they say in the book is leadership communications. And what they say in the first chapter is, at America, we worship at the altar of data. It's all about data and metrics. It runs business, and we need to know what the metrics are, and blah, blah, blah. And we talk about Wall Street. And look, I look at the numbers on Wall Street. I look at the unemployment numbers today. It dropped below. We got some great unemployment numbers. I look at numbers every day, right? But I tell you this, what drives Wall Street? Sentiment. Sentiment drives metrics. And so what you find is that your metrics can be great. We could have the greatest economy in the world, but if people think it's not good, like the University of Michigan's sentiment index, if they think it's not good, guess what? Those numbers drop. Right. So I realized that when
fear sets in. Yeah. When you see fear, you see the market plunge.
Yeah. You see the market plunge, right?
Uncertainty and fear. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no confidence in the market.
Yeah, and then people start to invest in commodities and currencies that they think are the safe risk currencies, right? So that's a big deal. So I realized when I got down there, okay, so how do you go in where the average reading level of adults in that area was a level 1? So to explain to all of our viewers what that means, a 5-year-old has to know a certain number of words, and I think that's 1,000, between 500 and 1,000 words. That's reading at level 1.
Wow.
The average 18-year-old in that area read at a level 1.
Wow.
Now that means that as they couldn't understand, they couldn't read the instructions in the ballot box.
Wow.
They could not operate cash registers. We had a national brand retailer coming to town, and the guy called me up because his candidates couldn't read.
Wow.
when he came into town from headquarters,
Yeah.
the manager that managed the store, he called me up in distress. He said, Ed,
Wow.
he said, my manager can't read.
Oh my gosh. How do you lead a people that are not at the level of education that you need them to be in order to function in the job?
Okay, so now you're leading me into the question that you're supposed to ask me, because that's the
Okay,
only way
so
I
I'm
can
asking, so let me back up. What is your leadership philosophy, Ed?
Thank you. Okay, so you've heard me say a little bit about it, but I think, and it's very similar to Kouzes and Posner's book, The Leadership Challenge. Okay, they have 5 principles of what they think, and they're my favorite authors. I even used the book as my textbook when I taught leadership, graduate class, and also John Maxwell's book on the 21 indescribable qualities of leadership. Those are probably 2 of my favorite books on leadership, because it's close to my personal philosophy. And I think the first thing is really inspire shared vision. You have to inspire.
Yeah.
And if you cannot inspire a shared vision, it's not just my board members that I had, right? That were ultra wealthy individuals, very successful in their businesses as lawyers or business owners. But it's also the populace, right?
Yeah.
The people that read at a level 1, the people that were lawyers, the people that were doctors in the community, the CEO of the hospital that was on my board, right? So I had to inspire a shared vision. So the first thing I did was I sat down and I said, okay.
You were like NASA, like the president.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to, I mean, basically you have to say, okay, where are we trying to go as a community? Okay. All they wanted was prosperity. Okay. All they wanted was to get out of the financial funk they were in. They did not have, okay, you and I live in metropolitan areas where the roads are paved, right?
Yeah.
So we go there, I went there initially, and when my family came there, they were just in shock.
Wow.
Roads were not paved. They didn't have the money to pave roads. And so, we had, I interviewed, because of the position I had to interview people that when we brought in a new principal for the big high school, they asked me to be the board of, the director of education asked me to be on the interview team. And so we interviewed these principals. Well, at the same time, I met the local French teacher that was from Africa. And so one day, I was there and they asked him, did he like being in the Mississippi Delta? And he said, yeah, I like it a lot. So I went to, well, why do you like it? He said, because it reminds me of being back home in Africa. And I thought, I was just stunned. I had never been to Africa at that point. I have since then. And in that job, I actually went there. And when I got to Africa, I saw the similarities and I thought, this is really sad. So how can we talk about being the most prosperous nation in the world and then have areas how can we have areas like this today in 2020 that have roads that basically look like a third world, right? And so you have to so how do you think the people that are living there, how do you think they feel? They feel very depressed. And so therefore, so it's a never ending cycle. So you have to say, okay, where, as a region, where do we want to go? We talk about the destination point. I like to back in from there.
Right.
And then I say,
reverse
okay.
engineer.
Yes, exactly. And then I talk about, well, how do we get there? Right. And to me, I'm very much like the race without a finish line, which was, the old total quality management philosophy. It was my first class in my MBA class at Nova. It was like, okay, it was TQM and how it all started. And basically you're always pursuing perfection. Okay. We know we'll never get there, but you never stop pursuing it. So I said, okay, let's talk about where we want to go and get them off of stop looking at where you currently are, and let's look at where you really want to go. And so that was like a light bulb to them.
Yeah, because it's like career pathing too. It's like where you start a job and you're just there and you have no path for growth or where you want to go with your career, and you just do it day after day and you're just there and you end up feeling like you're stuck in this rut because you didn't have a vision for where you could be and you didn't set that path for yourself. So you had to go in there and actually set a path for them to move forward to feel like, oh, we can actually do that. Can we
Yeah.
get there? So yeah,
Well,
that's
that that is a great point. And then you mentioned vision because there's a lot of truth to without a vision the people perish.
mm-hmm.
And the people another way of saying what the people perish is also the people are unrestrained. And so how that was translated in that area, and not only the Mississippi Delta, but I found out that there are 11 deltas. There's a Louisiana Delta, there's the Illinois Delta, and because I went to a meeting of all those deltas, and that's
Wow.
topic for a different discussion. But the issue was unrestrained meant that they had the highest, the lowest. They had the worst unemployment numbers in the nation. They had the worst education numbers. They had the lowest education numbers in the nation, and they had the highest STD rate in the nation. And so when you have all of those things combined, then it's really bad, right? And they had the
quality
highest
of life is just really low.
Yeah, and the highest violent crime rate in the nation. So that's a combination for a really bad storm. And so you have the haves and the have-nots, and so I had to bridge that gap.
Right.
And so that's why I was called in, to be able to bridge that gap. So the headhunter thought he remembered me from much earlier in my career, and he said, "I think you're perfect for this position." And I said to him, I was living in Chicago, and I just gotten these big consulting contracts, and I thought, okay, I don't know anyone in Mississippi. Why would I want to go there?
Mm-hmm.
They said, well, they've raised a lot of money to fix their problem. They knew they were in so much pain. And I think the beginning of really getting better is acknowledging that we have a problem. And they said to me in the interview, said, we brought the Republicans and the Democrats sitting at this table right now in front of you, Ed. I had the man, a civil rights lawyer that went to the Mississippi Delta in the 80s, 70s and 80s, and started suing cities around the Delta for racism. And he was still alive. So we had him. We had the most conservative people at that table. Right. They were all together, right? And they said, we have put down the plowshare, so to speak. We know we have a problem, and we need to turn this thing around. So
yeah, it's awareness. That's the first step. You have to be aware and acknowledge that there is a problem.
Well, that got me excited because I knew that, if I didn't have a family, it would have been an easy decision, but my kids were in the formative years at the time, and it was a big move for me to decide to leave. I'm a big city guy, Miami, Chicago. I love big cities. And so I love fast moving cities. Chicago was a little too slow for me. I don't want to offend any Chicago people.
Don't offend anybody in Chicago.
I don't want to offend any Chicago people. I love my 12 years there. Okay. And love going back there. My best friend still lives there. So, but the Midwest is different than, I would say, like a Miami or LA or New York. Okay. It's a different type of city, right? So you appreciate what you have in those cities. And so for me, when I say a little slow, that doesn't mean it's inferior. It's just that my pace, I have a very fast pace. So for me to go there was a big move. But when I saw that leadership had decided, look, we've got to do what we need to do to get better. That's
they're ready to pull up their
that's a team I could work with.
Right.
So anyway, but while I was there, it's a long way to say how I got into sustainability. Well, you can imagine.
That's okay. Listen, this is what the show is about. It's really about unpacking some things to get people to understand how you got where you are. Like, what did it take to build for you, this global company? What does it take? And it takes difficult decisions. It takes looking at situations and really trying to figure out, they think I'm the man for the job. Am I the man for the job? Yes, I am. It's like that step of confidence. Like, you did not back down from that. You did not think, oh my gosh, this is just too much for me. You were excited at the opportunity.
Yeah, you hit some key touch points, and I can tell you that it all links into sustainability because you can imagine when people say they want to change, when the change agent comes in, this happens everywhere. It doesn't matter if it's Miami, Chicago, New York, or Paris, France. They bring the person in, and then of course later on they try to be what that person was hired to do, right? And so in my role, I had to have enough confidence to say, let me do my job, without saying, let me do my job, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really important, because all of us want to change, right? All of us want to be better at who we are and what we do, right? And so, but it's the changing that's the hard part,
That's
right?
the hard part, yeah.
And sometimes, we need a spouse, or we need a friend, or we need a boss, or we need a neighbors, and to point out a blind spot. And when they do, even though sometimes when they do it in love, or they do it when we may not even want to use that term, we know that they're not trying to harm us, it still hurts, right? Because they basically touched a scab or a sore. But
Mm-hmm.
we realize if they hadn't done that, we would never have awakened, right? To
Right.
find out, okay, you know what, you're right. Okay, you're right about that. So, interesting, because in that area, okay, so we talk about an area like the Mississippi Delta, right? It's known for farming, the cotton, soybeans, rice, corn. Okay, those are the four major agricultural crops, some of the largest crops in the nation, right, that feed the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I was flying a lot. I was going not only out of the state, I was going out of the country, trying to bring investment into the Mississippi Delta, telling the world that, listen, I said, the Mississippi Delta is on sale. You can get us at a reduced price. This is a great time for you to invest, right? And so while I was on an American Airlines flight in American Way magazine, there was an article on bamboo being the green gold.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, bamboo. Well, all those years of studying renewable technologies, sustainable technologies in Chicago, I got excited, because now I'm reading this article, and they featured 3 companies that were either manufacturing bamboo products or growing bamboo plantlets, right? And I read how basically, I said, wow, why don't we do this in Mississippi?
Mm-hmm.
I said, because the economy is down. We've got
Right.
millions of acres of farmland. Why don't we use this? I had no idea what kind of firestorm I was about to start. But I thought, hey, this could help, because now we could do agri-tech, right? We could do technology transfer. And lo and behold, where I was living, a few miles away, was a world-class USDA research agricultural center with 100 PhDs from around the world.
Wow.
Within my own area, right? So here I was, I realized, wow. So we had this technology center already here. We got all this farmland. So I reached out to all 3 of the companies in that article. And the one that got back to me was the research, the company out in Northwest Washington that was growing the bamboo. And I called the owner, and she was so excited. She said, I cannot believe you called me. She said, Ed, do you know there are 2 places in the world that the researchers found that are optimal to growing bamboo as a crop? She said, in southern China and the Mississippi Delta.
I was gonna say the climate, the texture, the soil, everything probably is the same as in China, because they use the rice paddies. That yeah. As you were talking about bamboo, I'm like, wait a second, bamboo probably would go really well down there, because
oh yeah, and that's she said exactly what you just said, right?
And I'm not a PhD.
Well, I tell you, this is really interesting.
That's exciting.
Well, we before I went out to visit her, and before she came to visit me, I talked to some of my board members about it, and you could only imagine the responses. Right now, here it is. I had the largest row crop farmer in the nation on my board, and so initially, some of the people said they wanted to know if I was crazy, and I said, no, let's talk about this. I said, right now, you can't sell your crops. They're rotting. But see, they had something that if they couldn't sell their crops, the government would write them a check, right? So it was a check, and they knew exactly.
They were in a comfort zone.
And they knew exactly how much they were in a comfort zone, to the extent to where they knew how much per dollar they were going to get per acre for their soybeans, rice, corn, or whatever.
If it didn't sell, right?
If it didn't sell, right? So, so what's really interesting about this is I said, okay, I asked them to take a leap of faith with me, okay? And so my vice chairman said, you know what? I know a guy. I said, he owns a lot of farm land in the area. He said, let's set up a meeting. So he said, when he's in town, let's set up a meeting. So he set a meeting up and we went to dinner. And this man, he owned 20,000 acres of just rice. He owned a lot of farmland. He got excited about it because he was an innovator. So he got on an airplane.
The ones you got to find, the ones that are
yeah,
not afraid to take a risk.
Not afraid to take a risk, right? So, so he and his wife got on a
quick
plane.
Starts.
Yeah, right. Well, we all flew out to Washington and took a tour of this facility. Met the lady that I met in the article. She got all excited. I planned a North American bamboo supply chain summit. And I pulled people that were from around North America, Central America, that made bamboo apparel, they made bamboo flooring, they made all these bamboo products. And I got the researchers. We did it at the research center. I got professors from Mississippi State and all over so I brought the supply chain together. So I got the farmers there. I got law firms there. And one of my assistants, she put this up on the internet, okay? And so now all of a sudden, there's this guy, we did this 2-day summit on supply, because I had the farmers saying, if we grow it, who's gonna buy it?
Right.
And then I had the people that
they're in fear.
They're in fear.
You're asking them to change what they've been doing for centuries.
Yeah.
You're asking them to do something different. So they're in fear of that. And on the other hand, you have people that are ready to innovate and say, listen, we need this.
Yeah.
So that's brilliant. Yeah. You brought them together.
Well, they were the people that you just mentioned that actually made the products or bought some of them were buying from China and selling or reselling, but some were making. And so they said, well, where are we going to get the bamboo? So I said, I'm going to bring you guys together. And then we had the researchers, which is also very, very important because I also was very heavily involved in bamboo fuels and bamboo oils. The bamboo energy sector is a big deal, right? So I brought all those folks together. We did this summit. And so I learned a lot about bamboo and it makes over 10,000 products.
Like the peanut.
Yeah, exactly. It's like George Washington Carver, right? With the peanut.
It's like you're the new George Washington Carver of bamboo.
Yeah. Well, I can't tell you that I've been called a lot of things with bamboo in the name. So, but what's really funny is that one of my trips to Europe, I was in Belgium, and Belgium is known to being a research bellwether for bamboo. And there's this world-renowned bamboo research center, and this is pretty comical. I'm sitting down with this guy. He's probably got, 8 PhDs or something. I'm talking to him. And he said, there was some guy in North America that did this bamboo summit. He said, that was me. He said,
that's me.
What? And so I'm sitting there going, huh. And he mentioned the agricultural. He said, I don't know the town you're in, but we know about this research center. I said, well, it's in the town that I'm in. Mm-hmm. And so when I went back, we go back to the hope part. And when I got back and I did some interviews, I said, you folks don't know how famous you already are. And they're like, what are you talking about? I said, I was in Belgium and they know about
you.
Yeah, they know about you. And of course, now all of a sudden their confidence starts to rise a little bit. And so we only need, when you're trying to get some success, and this is what I told the board, and I would tell people in all the interviews, when news reporters would want to know, how are you going to make a difference? I said, look, we are not going to attempt to be Atlanta overnight. What we're going to try to do is get one victory. We get one victory, and then we leverage that, and we talk about it, and then people want to know, how did you do it? And we go from there. I said, that's how you grow it. I did have a board member he came to me one day. I'm telling you, he was very well educated. He's a lawyer. And he said, we want to be Atlanta. We used to be 40 years ago. We used to be the textile capital, of North America, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, wow, that was 40 years ago, and he said, we want to be Atlanta. I said, I'll tell you what, why don't we just try to be Jackson first? Yeah. I said, if we could get to be Jackson, then we could talk about being Atlanta. And so I understood. I said, I like the appetite. I like your vision. I like your drive. I like that you're setting goals. But let's look at something so leadership has got to be able to guide and give reasonable, attainable goals, right? And talk about those things and how to do those things.
And what you're saying is so interesting because individuals try to do that to themselves too. So you're talking about a city or a community that wants to be something else other than what they are without even understanding or recognizing the strengths and their own uniqueness. And let's be who we are and let's elevate that instead of trying to be someone else, because Atlanta is already Atlanta. Let's
Right.
not try to be Atlanta. Let's be the best Jackson that we could be.
Correct.
And so, right. And I see that in people all the time where they're trying to be somebody else because they don't really like who they are. And so let's elevate who you are and be the best you can be. So
Well,
I love it. Yeah.
That's very insightful because cities and regions and companies are led by people.
Yeah.
And that's what, when people say, well, it's our procedure, it's our process. You know, you're on hold with the bank, and they tell you, well, you know, it's our. And I said, you know, okay, so who wrote the procedures?
Mm-hmm.
I said,
Right.
Are we living for the procedures, or are the procedures written for our good? So
Right.
so let's talk about and sometimes so you're right. So if the leadership of a community or the leadership of an organization is a certain way, that's how the company is going to go. That's how the area is going to go.
How they are, that's the rest flows.
Yeah.
It flows in that way.
You know, it's a shame that sometimes, we have, and that's a shame, but I say sometimes sports is such a big analogy in our nation, but I have to think about this. Sometimes we see a coach that comes into any ball club. I mean, it could be, I've done a lot of coaching from 5-year-olds to semi-pro basketball. I've coached all of it, right? And so sometimes you see a coach come in and they turn a team around. The team goes from worst to first.
Worst to first.
In 1 year. All they did was change the coach, right? They don't change the players; they change the coach.
They change the leadership.
And so why? Because that person has inspired a shared vision, and they get buy-in from the players and the organization and the people, and everyone gets behind the coach or coaching staff. Yeah. It doesn't matter if it's a male or a female. I mean, you look at the lady that led the Tennessee basketball program. I mean, all these different programs, we could just go on and on. But I say it's a shame, but sometimes sports has to really give us that awakening. Or sometimes today we look at an Amazon, but Jeff Bezos wasn't. I remember when Jeff Bezos started, when he was selling used books. Mm-hmm. I mean, my kids have no idea. I have to remind them. I said, you know what? I was alive, when Amazon started. What?
Right.
Where you're around.
Just not too long ago.
Right. He's selling used books.
But he had a vision for where he wanted to go and kept expanding that vision. He didn't just get there and then say, oh, yeah. He just kept expanding that vision as he grew. So that's the model. We can't just sit back and say, oh, I've arrived. Yeah, look at this. I mean, Warren Buffett.
Right.
He's like, I'm going to do this until I die. He's not looking to retire. And he's like, there's more to do, and let's keep growing and doing. So that's wonderful. And it takes confidence. It does take a knowing of yourself and where you want to go and where you want to be, and the willingness to step into that. The boldness, I should say, because it's audacious. The show is Audacious Confidence, right? So you have to be a little audacious, and bold, and step into that instead of pulling back away from it.
Well, yeah, I mean, the audaciousness of leadership and confidence is so important because I look at it, and I won't promise you this is the last time I use a sports analogy, but this is.
Oh, it's fine. I like sports.
Yeah. So think about this. Okay, so I think about all the coaching that I've done. I think about all the coaches that I've had as an athlete, and I think, what coach wants to put a kid or a player in the game if they don't have confidence? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you know that player or that kid doesn't have the confidence to do what you need him to do.
Shoot a basket. I need you to shoot the basket.
Yeah, and that kid doesn't have the confidence, you're not going to put him in the game, right? So I think that with leadership, confidence is not arrogance. Confidence is, I think I can do this. Why? Because I've practiced it. I've listened. I've watched. I've learned from my mistakes. I know what works, what doesn't work. And see, that's how we are in business. That's how we are in life. So if you've led an organization, you kind of you've honed your expertise, and you say, okay, this is where I think it can work. And so for me to be that change agent, to come in there, to have the audaciousness to go into it's almost like I was like a drop zone. I was dropped down into the Delta, right? Yeah. Into a war zone. Like, okay, all right, so it's like, okay, God, give me a more difficult. No, I don't want anything more difficult, because that was not easy, right? And
Right. It
so,
wasn't.
so I realized it was going to take a lot of out of the box thinking to be able to move the needle in that area that we couldn't do. The person in that position before me had been there, they said, for 32 years.
Mm.
And that they said that he just wasn't going to change anything. And he was happy. And so I liked the guy. We got along great. He stayed in the town when I got there. But the guy he had it on remote control. I mean,
Which is like the farmers too. Everybody,
yeah,
they were just in their own kind of coma of complacency.
yeah.
We
That's
know,
a great.
we know it sucks, but this is what we got.
It perfect. Yeah, yeah. And so they realized they needed someone to
Shake it up a
things
bit.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what. So when I went overseas, I mean, they were like, "What?" I said, "Yeah, you have to understand. We have to go where the money is."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Right now, I mean, at that time in 2008, 2009, foreign investment into the U.S. for businesses was at an all-time high." Probably the highest it had ever been, or the highest in 30 or 40 years. And I said, this is probably the highest ever at that point.
Yeah.
So I said, you know what? We have to take advantage of that. So we have to go. So there were Europeans and Asians and people all over the world that were looking to invest. Well, what do I need?
Because the bubble burst and there was a lot of opportunity.
A lot of opportunity. And so, so that's why I traveled a lot at that time. And so once again, I thought back to what I wanted to do as a senior in college, and I thought, I cannot believe I'm doing exactly
You're actually doing exactly what you dreamt you'd do. Can I ask you, what was your biggest like mistake as a leader, or something that you would say you wondered, oh my gosh, how did I do this? And then how do I recover from this? Did you have any of those moments?
Oh yeah, I think unfortunately probably more than I'd like to admit. I would say that probably moving a little too fast at times because I think a visionary.
Because you see the vision and you going after it.
Yeah.
And sometimes people can't catch up to as fast as you're moving.
Exactly. I mean, I'll be honest with you. When I started Bamboo Utility, and I've started other businesses. I had a lawyer one time tell me I was 10 years ahead of my time. He said, "You were 10 years ahead."
That's like probably Steve Jobs had that same, and Jeff Bezos probably dealt with that same.
Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk.
Anybody who is a visionary and a leader like that, people look at them and say, "You're crazy." This is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm telling you, and I could say that moving fast, because the reason that I could say maybe visionaries move fast, and I know you understand this, is that we see what it can be, and we understand how to get there, but we have to realize that we need this team that is around us and behind. Everyone's not going to see the same. But you might have a small minority, one person, maybe two, if you're fortunate, right? That might catch a glimpse of it, right? And so, but
Moses again. Moses is a visionary. Let's go back to Moses. God told me to do this, and
that is. I tell you, if one day I'll try to find a couple of art. I don't know. It's crazy. It's funny because not only was it, and I can't just say it was the Delta, because when I lived in Chicago, it was the same thing. But in the Midwest, if you think about all the great companies that we have in the Midwest and have had in the Midwest, up in Minneapolis, you got Quaker Oats and 3M and Target and blah, blah, blah. And then we look at in Chicago, we think of all these Quakers in Chicago, actually Quaker Oats and Baxter and all these companies. But it's very, the Midwest, even they try to be, they're not like the Silicon Valley. Valley, risk-taking, Boston, Northeast, New York, Miami, Southeast Miami, a lot of Atlanta, a lot of risk-taking, that kind of thing. In the Midwest, very, very stable, right? And so you have to understand as a leader where you're planted, right? And who's around you. And so I think, I realized that I needed Chicago, but I realized I was also a little fast, because for them, it was like, they were kind of like the show me state. well, let's see if it works over here first. And then they'll build a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate around that, right? Once they see
Right.
that it works. But in Silicon Valley, they're going to say, hey, we'll throw $1 billion at it now. You know, we don't care if it works. You know, we think it's a great idea. You know,
We think it's all a great idea. Yeah.
Right, they're going to go. And so they're trying to get their business going here. And they're saying, we need your insight to do X. And so while I have confidence, I'm also very afraid. Right, because I don't want to make a mistake for this guy and his company. He's trusting me, and his business partner, they're trusting me to make the right decision. So same thing while I was in the Mississippi Delta or wherever I was. You know, the people brought me in. They were trusting me to make good decisions, you know, for the area to help grow the economy. So we were fortunate, and I think I brought in 4 or 5 companies in 2 or 3 years, which had never been done before, which is very difficult. Yeah. But I did it. Like one of them was as a rice silica. They took rice husks and made silica from the rice husks, and we brought them over. So I said, okay, we've gone overseas, we've gone around the nation. Let's look at regionally within a 200-mile radius of where we're living, Atlanta to Arkansas. Let's see what works, and we'll come in closer. And so, you know, I said, first you go broad and then you come in. And then you narrow in. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that silica company was from Arkansas, which was right next to Mississippi. And we were the perfect location for them because we had Uncle Ben's Rice. Actually, at the time, I think they changed the name because of what's happened recently. Right. But at the time, the Mars Corporation that owns Uncle Ben's manufactured every box of that rice in that town where I was. Yeah. So I had the Mars executive on my board as well. And so because there was a lot of rice in the area that was grown because of the Delta, this company that was a silica company wanted to be close to their supply chain to lower their costs so that they could produce silica to send around the world. So they were going to produce renewable energy out of the silica, right? So that was once again right within what I had been trained for. Sustainability, yeah. So that's how sustainability ties into what I do in a big way. You know, I mentioned the bamboo utility. I mentioned, you know, all the other things that, you know, when it comes to energy, we still haven't really tapped the renewable energy space. We hear a lot about Tesla. We hear a lot about battery technology. A lot of people don't know that there's still a lot to be desired in that area. I do know confidentially about some other technologies in the battery technology that will surpass anything we've ever seen before. Wow. That's probably, we're going to,
well, we'll keep an eye on you, Ed. We'll keep our eye on you. So I know we've been really, and this is so fascinating. I love that you went really deep into this story because it really shows how bold, audacious leadership, what it looks like, you know, sometimes it's not easy. It's not fun. I mean, especially if you're turning something around. Right. It is hard work and it requires risk and it requires the buy-in from everybody at every level, even, you know, at the lowest level. Right. And so you also had to raise the education level of people, which we're not going to go into, we're not going to talk about, but you know, you have to bring people up to a certain level in order to get them to do what you need them to do. But what I want to just, because I don't want to take up your whole afternoon here, I want to ask you what advice would you have as leadership advice to your child? You have one child, right? Three. You have 3 like me. Okay. You have 3 children. So what is your advice to your children about leadership?
I would just say that learn as much as you can from people that have been there before you, and understand that humility is the way to growth. That we have to be lifelong learners. We'll never arrive. Right. We'll never arrive. So don't ever get to a place to where you think that you're it. Mm-hmm. That you're at the top of your game. Even when you're at the top of your game, you're never at the top of your game. There's still more. You know, so I would just tell them to learn and listen and learn as much as you can, and understand that you should never stop learning, and you never stop having that hunger to learn.
Yes, I love that. And yes, I remember you have three girls.
Yes.
And you have three
Right.
girls. We did have that conversation before, way back.
Yes.
And so as far as building confidence now in who you are and what you do, what are some key elements that you would think, or that you believe, not what you would think, that you believe someone needs to really develop to get that?
Well, I would say to start with successes. There's another book that I really love. Um, well, the two books. Okay, first is by First Break All the Rules. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
by Dr. Marcus Buckingham. Okay, and he follows that book up with Now Discover Your Strengths, and it's groundbreaking. And you may know them as groundbreaking in the sense that he said American management is broken, and we need to just throw out all the rules and start over. And then after you read that book, it's a great book. He goes into Now Discover Your Strengths, and that's what Gallup organization developed their Strengths Finder Index on.
Right.
And
Yep.
so the thesis of the book is don't focus on your weaknesses as typical American management and HR has focused on your, like your performance appraisals. Like you sit there and and they start going over all your, okay, where you didn't do well here, you're below standards, you're below, he's saying, look, when you're a leader and a manager, and that's a whole nother topic, management versus leadership. But let's say you're managing someone or you're leading a team. He's saying you need to focus on the strengths and not the weaknesses. And I would say this individually, for someone to gain confidence, is to not focus on your weaknesses, because we all have them. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Understand the weaknesses that we have, and learn from them. But look at a strength, even if it's just one thing, one strength that you've got, and you take that and count that as a victory. And you say, how can I develop that one strength? If I communicate well, how can I communicate even better? Right? Because I promise you, even though I'm a good communicator,
there's more to learn.
I'm sure that I'm leaving a lot of things on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I'm sure if someone came in that was a better communicator than me, they would say, okay, this is where you're falling short. Right? And so I have to be open, like that book I read on leadership communications. I mean, when I read that book, it was almost like I was a first grader in communication. Like, oh my goodness.
I don't know all of that.
I'm not a good communicator. I'm going, are you serious? And I'm like, okay, yeah, I know, and after college, I thought I was a good writer. And then my boss came in, he saw my letter that I was about to send out. He said, give me that letter. He took a look at it. He said, print that off. And then he came back 5 minutes.
The red pen. Circle, circle.
He came back 5 minutes later and he had a red pen, and it had 80% of the
every sentence had red in it. So, what I really, really love that you say, understand your strengths, because as I do Colby, we had that conversation too, and that's all strength based. And the real interesting thing to it too is that some things that have been attributed as weaknesses to us in society are actually, or can actually be, a strength, but you have not learned how to appropriate it as a strength. Instead of I can give an example of that in, like, again, with Colby. If you are, say, a 2 in follow through, that's one of the action modes that we talk about. A 2 in follow through, people will think that you're always disorganized, that you don't know where things are.
Right.
Always telling you clean up your desk, you're not organized. Right. And that is a weakness that they see. But the way your mind works is that you are adaptable, and you look at the shortcuts in a process to get to the same result. Instead of going through every single step, you're able to circumvent some steps. So it's about using your skill and your that talent, innate talent, to actually break the system, to see, well, what is working, what isn't working. But you haven't learned how to take that. They just say you're disorganized, you're this and you're that, and you've bought into that as a weakness, instead of now saying, you know what, my adaptability is a strength, and I can actually go into any situation and turn things around because I am adaptable, or I can fit into any kind of environment and make it work. So it's really not just learning your strengths, but understanding how to use those strengths most effectively. So
What's interesting is that if the COVID crisis, if the pandemic has taught us globally one thing, it's adaptability.
Yeah.
And I tell you this, there before COVID, there were organizations, there were policies, procedures, there were bosses
That was so rigid.
Yes, and would never want anyone to work from home because it didn't trust people, right? And it's like, guess what?
They have no choice.
You have to trust them now.
You
Guess
have
what?
no choice.
You have no choice, right? And so that's why Marcus Buckingham wrote the book, First Break All the Rules. But he was a visionary, and that was written about 25 years ago, right? He was way ahead of his time, right? And he's saying, look, we need to break all the rules. I'd love to see him today and say, Marcus,
listen,
you were 30 years ahead of your time, man.
Yeah.
You were so right on, and so that's what we have to do.
Because
unfortunately,
even the CEO of Pfizer was talking about, collapsing time. He said something that would take us, a vaccine would take us like years to develop, 18 months to 2-3 years to develop. We got to do it in like months. We don't have the luxury of waiting all these years to develop a vaccine for this. We have to churn it out in, like 3 to 6 months. So they had to throw out all procedures, all policies, and rewrite the book.
That's interesting because I follow that very, very closely professionally because, before, I was in economic development as a state official. Then I left that and got into pharmaceutical sales back in the day, right, with Big Pharma. And so I did that. I've gotten out of pharma 2 or 3 times and thrown back in. And so I'd say 2.5-3 years ago, I was in China. And while I was over there, I met these 2 Korean guys. And this past March 3rd, actually, I got an email on LinkedIn from one of them. And he said this: "Hello, Mr. Johnson. We met in Wuhan, China, blah, blah, blah." And I'd actually forgotten I'd been in Wuhan at the time. And he goes, "We are launching the most accurate COVID-19 test kit in the world, and it gets results in 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. Now, this is 6 months ago, right? What month is this? This is September?
It's September,
yeah, I guess
right.
6 months
this
ago.
Is back in March, right.
So I was watching the news like all of us, and people are getting results. It's taking 2 or 3 weeks to get the results. I'm going, so I didn't believe him. I'm thinking, okay, first of all, how does that work? Mm-hmm. 20 minutes, results in 20 minutes, no way that could happen, and it's most accurate. Now, I used to work from Big Pharma. I don't believe it.
Yeah, you don't believe it.
Yeah, and so he said, "Can you help us launch North America?" I'm going, "Nope, I'm good." He emailed me again a week later and said, "Do you still want to would you reconsider?" So I said, "Look, you've got to explain to me how this works. I don't believe it, blah, blah, blah." Well, he did. And I said, "Well, let me check." And so I talked to a friend of mine that was an infectious disease specialist for our government. He said that technology, if it's what he says it is, it's a game changer. I said, "Really?" He said, "Let me introduce you to a doctor." She looked at it. She said, "That's a game changer." Mm. So I thought, like, okay, my other businesses, my real estate's going great. Why am I doing this? Band Utility's going well. And so lo and behold, 6 months later, I now have a team around me that's involved. We now manufacture no longer in Korea. We're now manufacturing in Boston. We're USA made. That's why I launched I1 Buy USA. Mm-hmm. I1 Buy USA is now, we've got maybe 12 people in North America, Nepal, some are selling in Europe. And so lo and behold, I'm involved, in the COVID crisis in a way that I thought I'd never be involved in.
Right.
And because I do have a background in healthcare. And so you talk about leadership and, I would have had no idea, but I think sometimes your gifts and your skills, people will recognize them when you don't.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this guy, not only did he remember me, he read up on my bio on LinkedIn, and he thought, maybe Ed can help me. Mm-hmm. I didn't think I could help him, but we have.
And he was persistent.
Yeah, he was persistent.
That's another part of leadership. You got to be persistent, and confident. You got to, what you have, what you got, and you got to be persistent.
Yeah. So that's, so all of those things are under the umbrella of really Johnson Global Ventures. But so like I said at the beginning of the conversation, I just evolved into these things.
Yeah.
I would say I certainly developed and created Bambutility. Now I did create I1 Bio USA, but it wasn't something that I sought.
Right.
You know,
Like you didn't say, I'm going to start this company.
no.
It evolved, like you said. It became a necessity. It's like, listen, I have to get involved in this because
Right.
this is going to change the world.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's probably one of my values is making a difference. You know, if you know, I have a friend in Chicago, one of my dear friends, Melissa Giovanali, she's written, God knows, 30, 40 books. And she wrote this book called Networlding. And Networlding basically is a book. The premise is that you network with people with shared values.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people it's family. Some people it's making a difference. Some people it could be profit or economics. And so you might have multiple values and you sort of group yourself with people that share the same values.
Mm-hmm.
And I can say that, you know, when it comes down to these issues, I would say that, did I want to be that person that made a difference 20 years ago? Probably, but didn't really recognize it as
didn't
such.
recognize it. Yeah.
You know, and, but I mean, I like to make a difference and as well as, you know, be that, you know, I know if you make a real difference, it's good business.
Yeah.
And so I do want people to win-win. But at the same
changing lives, man. You're changing lives.
That's
really
what we're on earth to do. We're
really
you know
are.
Yeah. And so that's, you know, you just have to be strong and confident in what you're doing and who you are. But thankfully I have a lot of people around me. I say a lot, maybe a few that I can confide in and that can be, you know, the people that can see any blind spots or give input and vice versa. I think that's really, really important.
You have to be open to hearing it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not easy to hear it, but
No.
when you're open to hearing it. That's really, because that brings self-awareness. So that's great. I have thoroughly enjoyed this interview. Thank you so very much. Is there anything else you want to share? I know people are probably hanging, trying to find out what happened with the Mississippi Delta. Like, wait a minute, she didn't let him finish the story.
I know, that's okay. You know, I would just net it out real quickly. So I stayed there almost 3 years and realized that it was time to move on for a few reasons. Number one, I felt like I'd put a plan in place that people behind me actually came and built upon. When I started seeing people call me up and read my business plan to me and they didn't know I'd written it, I realized that, okay, time is up. Yeah, one guy he says, he called me from California. He goes, hey, you know, I want to know if you could help me out and be my, you know, partner with me on this bamboo business. And he's starting to tell me all these things and he's starting to read stuff. And I said, where'd you get that? He goes, well, this guy over in so-and-so gave it to me from New York. I said, do you know I wrote that? He goes, what? I said, yeah, you're reading my business plan.
Back to me.
I said, oh my God, really, you know. So I realized, you know what? I realized, okay, at this point, I'm starting to be duplicated, replicated. Plus my dad was actually getting sick down in Florida. And I realized that, you know, for my kids to get to know their grandparents who lived in Florida, it was time for a move. My kids didn't really like it there. It was a personal family move. It's like, okay, you know, for them, they were set in stone in the Chicago suburbs. You know, they had their friends, they had their school. Yeah. They were a lot younger, but they still remember that. And so it was difficult for them. It was a great time for me to do it. And I was actually, you know, glad just to come back. I'm glad I did because my dad got really sick a month after we moved. And he wound up staying with us for the next 6 years before he passed away. So that was a great thing for me to do what I did when I did it. Having no other siblings, that was important. You know, there's nobody else for him. So for me, it was a family move back to Florida. I was gone for 14 years from the state and everything had changed. I did not know how to get around Orlando. I didn't know streets. I mean, it's unbelievable what had happened, you know. So what happened in Mississippi is that we did make a big difference. I think they're still using the playbook. I had a staff member. She came to me 6 months into the job and she walked into my office one day and she said, you're doing it. I said, what are you talking about? She said, you're actually doing what you showed. I gave the staff, my staff a playbook. And I said, here's our little playbook that the executive board and I agreed to do and some things I wrote out. I said, so we're going to follow this plan. I said, now, in the 6-month mark, we'll be here. The 12-month mark, we should be here. 18-month, this is what we're going to try to do. Because I believed a lot in management by objectives. I said, so this is how we're going to go about it. And so I think today, I've been back to Florida now 10 to 12 years. They're still using the playbook.
Wow.
So I feel good that, that I left a foundation for whoever came in behind me. I think they're on the second person since I left, because I formed a new organization there. I seem to have this knack for starting new organizations. I start them on my own, and people call me to start them.
Start them, right?
Yeah. So I'll build it up, and I'll exit when I need to, or I'll continue it. I mean, I've been doing Bamboo Utility a very long time, but there's going to be some news on that really soon too. I'll have to tell you privately.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Excellent.
That's it.
Wonderful. You set the foundation. That's wonderful. I love that. So with that said, guys, this has been a really exciting journey that we've been on this podcast with Ed Johnson. And I hope you check out Bamboo Utility, check out renewable, sustainable resources. And I'll bring him back on again when he has more news about what next he's accomplishing, because I really believe that when you're talking about leadership with someone who is that impactful, they're always going to have something new to share. So thank you so much, Ed, for sharing your wisdom with us. And we'll see you next time on the Leading with Audacious Confidence show.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Audacious confidence is the unshakable belief in yourself that's so brave and so bold that you step into what's possible for yourself, despite your feelings, fears, or failures. I encourage you to follow, subscribe, like, and share this out with your friends. To learn more about our guests, check out some additional episodes. Go to aliciacouri.com/leading with audacious confidence. Until next time, this is Alicia Couri saying, live your life bold, brave, and step out with audacious confidence. Till next time.